Play the white keys from C up to the next C and you get a bright, settled major scale. It sounds finished, optimistic, like the end of a happy song. Now play those exact same white keys, but start and end on the note A instead. Don't change a single key under your fingers, just shift where you begin. 7 of the same letters, the same piano, and yet the mood drops. It turns serious, a little sad, a little shadowed, the sound of a film when the weather changes. That is the natural minor scale, and the strange part is what caused it. We didn't add a sharp or a flat. We didn't reach for a black key. The only thing that changed was where you decided home is. Over the next few minutes we'll build this scale from scratch, find the exact notes that carry the darkness, understand why your ear reads them as sad, and then move the whole pattern to a new key. By the end, you'll be able to make any melody sound serious on demand. Let's take it apart and see exactly where that darkness comes from. Every scale is really just a recipe of steps, and there are only 2 ingredients. A half step is the very next key, the smallest move on the piano, whether that next key is black or white. A whole step is 2 half steps stacked together, which means you skip the key in between. That's it. Master those 2 moves and you can build every scale there is. The major scale we built last time follows a fixed order: whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. The natural minor scale uses those very same steps, the same count of wholes and halves, but it deals them out in a different order: whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. Read those 2 patterns side by side and the change jumps out. The half steps move earlier. In major, you open with 2 confident whole steps before the first half step arrives. In minor, the second step is already a half step, and that early little pull, that quick squeeze right near the bottom, is the first hint of the color to come. It's a small rearrangement on paper, but your ear notices it instantly. Follow this minor pattern from any note at all and you'll land on a natural minor scale. And here's the key idea: the note you start on becomes the home, the resting point your ear keeps wanting to return to, the place the whole scale leans toward. Change the home, and you change everything. Let's build the easy one first, the one with no traps. The note A is to natural minor what C is to major, the clean version: no sharps, no flats, nothing but white keys. So starting on A, let's walk the recipe 1 step at a time. A whole step up lands on B, the white key just before C. From there a half step brings us to C. Then a whole step up to D, and another whole step to E. Now a half step lands on F. A whole step carries us up to G, and one final whole step climbs home to A. Spell the whole thing out and you get A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and back to A. Notice what's missing: there isn't a single black key in there, exactly like C major. The keys are literally identical, the same 8 notes top to bottom. The only difference between the 2 scales is which note your ear treats as the center of gravity. In C major, everything pulls toward C. In A minor, everything pulls toward A. And from that one quiet decision about where home sits, the entire emotional weight of the scale tilts from bright to dark. Same notes, different gravity. So if the notes can be completely identical, where does the sadness actually live? Line the 2 scales up against each other from the same starting note, and 3 notes stand out. Compared to the major scale, natural minor has a lower 3rd, a lower 6th, and a lower 7th, each one dropped by exactly 1 half step. Those 3 small drops are the whole story. That 3rd is the heavy hitter. In a major scale, the 3rd sits a cheerful 4 half steps above home, wide and open. In minor, it slides down to just 3 half steps above home, and that single step inward is the largest part of the difference between bright and dark. If you only changed 1 note in the entire scale, change that one, and you'd already hear the shift. Then comes the lowered 6th, which adds a wistful, aching quality near the top of the scale, the note songwriters lean on for longing. And the lowered seventh softens the climb back to home, so the scale doesn't strain upward the way major does, it settles instead. 3 notes, the third, the sixth, and the seventh, each nudge down by a half step. That is the entire recipe for a darker mood. Nothing exotic, nothing added from outside the alphabet, just 3 small steps down. Why do our ears actually hear that as sad in the first place? A lot of it comes from that lower third arriving so early in the scale. The very first real leap, the jump up to the third, colors how we read everything that follows, and a smaller, closer third reads to us as soft, heavy, turned inward. A major third feels like it's reaching up and out toward the light, a minor third feels like it's settling down and in toward the ground. That one interval does most of the emotional work. The lowered seventh matters too, in a quieter way. In a major scale, the seventh sits just a half step under home and it leans hard upward, almost impatient, desperate to resolve to the top. Lower that seventh by a half step and the urgency drains out of it. What's left feels calmer, more resigned, more willing to stay where it is. Put those together, a darker third and a less hungry seventh, and you get music that sounds reflective instead of triumphant. Now, none of this is a strict law of nature. Emotion in music is learned as much as it's felt, and plenty of minor key music is furious or driving rather than tearful. But across centuries of Western music, composers reached for exactly these intervals when they wanted weight, longing, or grief, and our ears grew up hearing that connection. So when the third drops, we feel it before we can explain it. Now let's take the recipe somewhere new and prove it isn't tied to white keys. The note E is the next friendliest home to build on, and watch what the pattern forces us to do. Begin on E. The first move is a whole step, and a whole step from E lands on F sharp, a black key. Why F sharp and not plain F? Because plain F is only a half step above E, and the recipe demands a whole step right here, so the pattern itself pushes us onto the black key. We didn't choose it, the formula did. From F sharp, a half step brings us to G. Then a whole step up to A, another whole step to B, and a half step lands on C. A whole step carries us to D, and a final whole step climbs home to E. Spell it out and you get E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, and home to E, exactly one black key, F sharp, and notice that we never bent a single rule to get it, the same 7 steps simply demanded it. That's the real power of a formula. Learn one pattern, drop it on any of the 12 notes, and it builds you a perfect minor scale every time, picking up whatever sharps or flats it needs along the way. So that's the natural minor scale, the same letters you already know, reshuffled around a new home, with the third, the sixth, and the seventh lowered to pour shadow into the sound. Major and minor are the 2 great moods that most Western music draws from, the sunlight and the shade, and you can now build either one from a single string of whole and half steps. That's a real piece of fluency. But here's the detail that should nag at you, the loose thread worth pulling. A minor used only the white keys. C major used only the white keys. The exact same 7 notes, the same piano keys, and yet one sounds bright and the other sounds dark, decided entirely by where you call home. That is not a coincidence. It's a hidden family tie between one major scale and one minor scale, and once you see it, key signatures suddenly start to make sense, because 2 scales that share every note also share the same set of sharps and flats. Next time, we follow that thread all the way in, and meet relative major and minor, the twin scales hiding inside each other.